No badge, no entry to this area. The supervisor shouted at the dirty boy standing at the factory gate. Everyone kept their distance. Only one young woman secretly handed him a sandwich. That afternoon, the supervisor called her to his office for violating security protocols. Later that evening, 3 Marines knocked on his door. Who had he just treated like garbage? That made an entire unit stand up for honor. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Nora Bennett pulled her thin jacket tighter as the cold November wind cut through the employee break area of Iron Ridge Metalworks Manufacturing. At 27, she was neither the youngest nor the oldest worker at the factory in this small Pennsylvania town, but she was certainly one of the quietest. Orphaned by her mother's early death, Nora lived with her aging father and younger sister in a modest home just 10 blocks from the factory. Each morning, she woke at 5 a.m. to prepare lunch for herself and often her father, who worked at the local hardware store. Her co-workers knew her as the woman with homemade sandwiches who rarely joined workplace gossip, but always had a kind word for everyone. Nora had worked at Eagle Line for nearly 5 years in the assembly division, maintaining a perfect attendance record and never causing trouble. This made her practically invisible to management, except to Supervisor Langston, a stern man in his 50s who seemed perpetually irritated by anything that deviated from his narrow definition of normal. 15 minutes for lunch today, people, Langston announced as workers filed into the outdoor break area behind the factory. We've got that big order to finish. The workers huddled at metal tables under a corrugated roof extension, their breath visible in the cold air. A light drizzle had started, making the November chill even more biting. Nora unwrapped her sandwich, turkey and cheese with homemade mayo, and poured hot soup from her thermos. That's when she noticed him, a small boy maybe 10 years old standing just beyond the chain-link fence that separated the break area from the empty lot behind the factory. His thin jacket was soaked through, his sneakers caked with mud, but what caught Nora's attention were his eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, staring not at the people but at their food. The boy didn't speak or gesture. He simply stood there, one hand clutching his stomach, shivering in the cold drizzle. Hey, no loitering. Langston's voice cut through the quiet murmur of lunchtime conversation. This is private property. The boy flinched but didn't move. Langston strode toward the fence, waving his clipboard. No begging allowed here. Move along before I call the police. Workers averted their eyes, suddenly very interested in their lunches. No one wanted to get involved. Langston was known for holding grudges against those who questioned his authority. Nora watched as the boy's shoulders slumped even further. Without a word, she carefully wrapped half of her sandwich in a napkin. Looking around to make sure Langston was distracted with paperwork, she walked casually to the fence and placed the wrapped sandwich on a cardboard box near where the boy stood. What are you doing? Whispered Rachel, a co-worker who had noticed her action. You know Langston has a strict policy about encouraging vagrants. You could get written up. Nora shrugged slightly. He's cold and hungry. A little food isn't a crime. Your funeral, Rachel muttered, turning away. The boy hadn't moved toward the sandwich, his eyes now fixed on Nora with a mixture of wariness and hope. Nora gave him a small nod of encouragement before turning back toward her table. She had only taken 3 steps when Langston's voice boomed behind her. Bennett, what do you think you're doing? Nora froze as Langston stormed past her to the fence. He spotted the wrapped sandwich and snatched it up. We have rules here, he snapped, holding the sandwich like it was contaminated. You want to feed strays, do it on your own time. With a dismissive flick, he tossed the sandwich onto the wet ground. The break area fell silent. Every worker watched the confrontation, but no one intervened. That's company property you're giving away, Langston continued, his face flushed with anger. And you're encouraging trespassing in a restricted area. Nora didn't argue. Without a word, she walked to where the sandwich had fallen, picked it up, brushed it off and placed it back on the box, this time wrapping it more securely in the napkin. Did you hear what I said, Ben? Langston demanded. Nora straightened and met his eyes. Yes, sir. And I heard you, she replied quietly before returning to her seat. The boy remained motionless, his eyes now fixed on Nora with an intensity that would stay with her long after this cold November day. When everyone turns their back, only conscience remains. Want to know what happened next? The rest of Nora's shift passed in uncomfortable silence. Co-workers avoided eye contact, not wanting to be associated with her apparent rebellion. At 3:40, 15 minutes before her shift ended, a message came through the factory floor intercom system. Nora Bennett to the supervisor's office. Immediately, a few workers shot her sympathetic glances as she wiped her hands on a shop rag and made her way through the assembly area. Langston's office, a glass-walled room that allowed him to monitor the factory floor, stood at the far end of the building. Nora knocked twice on the doorframe. Come in and close the door, Langston said without looking up from his computer. Nora entered, standing quietly with her hands folded in front of her. Langston finally looked up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and satisfaction. "I've documented today's incident in your personnel file," he said, sliding a form across the desk. "This is an official written warning for violating company security protocols by engaging with an unauthorized person near the technical area and for insubordination when instructed to cease." Nora glanced at the form but made no move to pick it up. "Sign at the bottom," Langston instructed, "and understand that a second violation will result in suspension without pay. A third means termination." As Nora signed the form, Langston leaned back in his chair. "You know, Bennett, I don't understand people like you. We have rules for a reason. That kid could have been casing our facility. He could have been a distraction while someone else breached security. He was just hungry," Nora said quietly. Langston's expression hardened. "Next time, take your lunch and go save the world instead of coming to work. We need reliable employees here, not bleeding hearts." Nora nodded silently, placed the pen back on the desk and left the office. The weight of injustice settled heavily on her shoulders as she changed out of her work clothes and punched her time card. She hadn't expected a medal for sharing her lunch, but being formally disciplined for a simple act of kindness seemed cruelly disproportionate. The drizzle had turned to steady rain by the time Nora began her walk home. The boy was long gone, though she found herself scanning the streets as she walked, wondering where he had sought shelter from the worsening weather. At home, Nora went through her evening routine mechanically, helping her father with his medicine, preparing a simple dinner for the family, and assisting her 16-year-old sister Maya with homework. She didn't mention the incident at work, not wanting to worry her father, whose health had been declining for months. "Nora, you're miles away," her father noted as they cleared the dinner dishes. "Rough day?" She managed a smile. "Nothing special, just tired." Just as she was finishing the dishes, a sharp knock came at the unusual time for visitors, especially on a rainy Tuesday evening. "I'll get it," she called, drying her hands on a dish towel. When she opened the door, Nora found herself facing three men in crisp Marine Corps uniforms, standing at attention despite the rain soaking into their service caps. The lead Marine, a staff sergeant with a weathered face and sharp eyes, raised his hand in a formal salute. "Miss Nora Bennett?" he asked. Nora nodded, too surprised to speak. "Staff Sergeant David Sloan, United States Marine Corps," he introduced himself. "These are Corporals Miller and Diaz. We're here to express our gratitude to you on behalf of our commanding officer and a family in our unit." Nora blinked in confusion. "I think there's been a mistake. I don't know anyone in the Marines." "No mistake, ma'am," Sergeant Reeves assured her. "May we come in for a moment? We won't take much of your time." Still bewildered, Nora stepped aside to let them enter. Her father appeared from the living room, eyebrows raised in silent question. "Dad, these men are from the Marine Corps. They say they want to thank me for something, but I'm not sure what." The three Marines stood respectfully in the small entryway, as Sergeant Reeves continued. "Miss Bennett, the boy you offered food to today, outside the Eagle Line factory, is Jacob Whitaker, the nephew of Colonel Mark Whitaker, who has served with distinction in the Marine Corps for 25 years. Nora's eyes widened. "The boy at the fence?" "Yes, ma'am." Corporal Hughes, the youngest of the three, spoke up. "Jacob's mother, the colonel's sister, passed away last week after a long illness. The family has been trying to make arrangements to bring Jacob to the colonel's new posting at Camp Ridgecrest, but there have been complications with guardianship paperwork. Jacob was staying with a neighbor until the paperwork cleared," Sergeant Reeves continued, "but he ran away yesterday morning. The neighbor didn't report it immediately, thinking he might return. We've been searching for him since yesterday evening." "Is he okay?" Nora asked, genuinely concerned. "He looked so cold and hungry." "He is now," Corporal Ramirez said with a nod. "After receiving your sandwich, Jacob made his way to Marine Recruiting Office downtown. He remembered his uncle mentioning it once. The recruiters recognized the colonel's name immediately and contacted us at the base." Sergeant Reeves reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph. "Colonel Whitaker asked us to show you this and deliver a message. This was taken during his second deployment to Afghanistan in 20. The photo showed a group of Marines standing beside a school building. Children surrounded them, many holding books and supplies. "The colonel said to tell you, a child remembers kindness and a unit never forgets," Sergeant Reeves recited. "Colonel Whitaker has spent his career building schools and delivering humanitarian aid alongside his combat duty. He believes firmly that small acts of kindness define us more than grand gestures." Nora's father stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter has always been like that, seeing people others look past." Corporal Hughes nodded. "Sir, Jacob told us that when everyone else turned away, your daughter was the only one who saw him as a person, not a problem. He said he was about to give up hope when she shared her lunch. It was just half a sandwich," Nora said quietly. Sometimes that's all it takes, Sergeant Reeves replied. Jacob told us he hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. He was cold, scared, and starting to make desperate decisions. Your sandwich gave him the strength to keep going and find help. As the Marines prepared to leave, Sergeant Reeves handed Nora an envelope. The colonel would like to thank you personally when he arrives tomorrow, and he wanted you to have this. It's not much, but it comes with the gratitude of our entire unit. Later, after the Marines had gone, Nora opened the envelope to find a handwritten note from Colonel Whitaker and a Marine Corps Challenge coin, a special token of recognition rarely given to civilians. The note read simply, "Some heroes wear factory uniform. Thank you for seeing my nephew when others looked away. I don't know about you, but this part really hit me. Type respect if it moved you too." Nora slept little that night, her mind replaying the Marines' visit and wondering about the boy Jacob and what would happen to him now. By morning she had almost convinced herself that the entire evening had been a strange dream, until she spotted the Marine Corps Challenge coin on her nightstand. Its weight in detail, undeniably real. She arrived at work earlier than usual, hoping to avoid unnecessary interactions with her coworkers. The incident with the sandwich seemed trivial compared to what she now knew about Jacob's situation, but she doubted Supervisor Langston would see it that way. At 8, heads turned as the factory's front entrance doors swung open. 3 Marines in formal dress uniforms, the same ones who had visited Nora's home, marched into the lobby with military precision. They were accompanied by a 4th man, older and distinguished, with Colonel's eagles gleaming on his uniform. The factory receptionist rose uncertainly from her desk. "Can I help you, gentlemen? We're here to speak with the factory management and Supervisor Langston," Colonel Whitaker stated, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "It concerns an incident that occurred yesterday involving one of your employees." The receptionist hurriedly called the general manager, who appeared minutes later, looking both confused and concerned at finding 4 Marines in his lobby. After brief introductions, the entire group was escorted to the conference room, with Supervisor Langston summoned shortly after. Throughout the morning, workers whispered about the military presence, speculation running wild. Nora kept her head down, focusing on her assembly tasks, though she couldn't help noticing the frequent glances in her direction. During the morning break, Rachel sidled up to Nora. "Do you know why there are Marines in the conference room with Langston and upper management?" Nora hesitated. "I might. Does it have something to do with that kid yesterday?" Rachel pressed. Before Nora could answer, the factory intercom crackled to life. "Nora Bennett to the conference room, please." A hush fell over the break area as Nora stood, smoothed her work apron, and made her way toward the administrative wing. She could feel every eye following her progress across the factory floor. In the conference room, Nora found an unexpected scene. Supervisor Langston sat rigid in his chair, face flushed and eyes fixed on the table. The general manager and human resources director flanked him, both looking grave. Opposite them, the 4 Marines stood with perfect posture, Colonel Whitaker at their center. "Miss Bennett," the general manager said, gesturing to an empty chair, "please join us." As Nora sat, Colonel Whitaker stepped forward. Unlike the stern military stereotype, his face bore deep laugh lines around kind eyes, though his bearing remained unmistakably that of a career officer. "Miss Bennett, I'm Colonel Mark Connolly. My nephew Jacob is safe at the base now, thanks in large part to your kindness yesterday." Nora nodded, still uncertain why this warranted a formal meeting. Colonel Whitaker continued, "I've explained to your management the circumstances of Jacob's situation and your role in helping him find his way back to family. What I find concerning and what prompted this visit is learning how you were disciplined for that same act of kindness." The general manager cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, we want to apologize for the mishandling of yesterday's situation. Had we known the circumstances—" "With respect, sir," Colonel Whitaker interrupted, "the circumstances shouldn't matter. Basic human decency toward a hungry child shouldn't require special circumstances to be acceptable in your workplace." Supervisor Langston shifted uncomfortably. "We have security protocols. I understand security concerns better than most," Colonel Whitaker said evenly. "I've commanded security details in active war zones. What happened yesterday wasn't a security issue, it was a failure of compassion." The Human Resources Director spoke up. "We've already removed the written warning from Miss Bennett's file, and will be reviewing our policies regarding community interaction." Nora sat in stunned silence as the meeting continued, watching as the corporate hierarchy she'd known for 5 years was temporarily reorganized by the quiet authority of Colonel Whitaker and his Marines. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the factory. A worker in shipping had captured video of the Marines entering the building and posted it to the local factory workers' social media group, with the caption, "Marines came to thank someone for a sandwich."
What did we miss? Within hours, the story had reached the local newspaper. A reporter called the factory for comment, eventually piecing together enough details to run a story. Factory worker disciplined for helping hungry child. Marines intervene. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The factory's social media accounts were flooded with comments, most criticizing the handling of the situation. By afternoon, the company's regional director had called an emergency meeting with management. Inside the factory, Nora found herself navigating an unexpected shift in her workplace status. Co-workers who had never spoken to her stopped by her station with encouraging words. Even Rachel, who had warned her against helping Jacob, sheepishly admitted she wished she'd had Nora's courage. At 4:30 p.m., as her shift ended, Nora was surprised to find Colonel Whitaker waiting in the lobby. "I hope you don't mind my waiting," he said, "but I wanted to speak with you personally, away from all the formalities." They walked together to a small park across from the factory, where Jacob sat on a bench, now clean and properly dressed, though his expression remained solemn. "Uncle Mark says you're the sandwich lady," Jacob said, when Nora approached. Nora smiled. "I guess I am." "Thank you," the boy said simply. "Nobody else even looked at me." Colonel Whitaker placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Jacob will be coming to live with me and my family at Camp Ridgecrest. We've expedited the guardianship paperwork." "I'm glad," Nora said sincerely. "He deserves a good home." "Miss Bennett." "Nora," Colonel Whitaker said, "what you did may seem small to you, but it meant everything to my family." Jacob lost his mother, then found himself alone and afraid in a strange town. Your simple act of kindness was the first moment of normalcy in his world that had completely fallen apart. The conversation was interrupted by Nora's phone buzzing with a text message from her father. "Turn on Channel 7 News. You're on." The local evening news had picked up the story, interviewing factory workers about the Marines' visit. Without security camera footage from the break area, they had reconstructed the sandwich incident based on eyewitness accounts, painting Nora as a modern-day Good Samaritan standing against corporate callousness. By the following morning, Supervisor Langston had been placed on administrative leave pending review, and Nora received a formal apology from the company president. The factory announced a new community outreach program in partnership with local food banks, a transparent attempt at damage control that nevertheless promised to do some good. 2 weeks later, Nora found herself at the center of attention at the town's annual Veterans Appreciation Ceremony. The mayor presented her with a Citizen of Quiet Honor certificate, while Colonel Whitaker and his unit stood at attention nearby. Jacob, now enrolled in the Young Marines program at Camp Ridgecrest, had returned for the ceremony. When called to the stage, he walked straight to Nora and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I ate your sandwich and believed my mom was still watching over me," he whispered, just loud enough for Nora to hear. Tears filled her eyes as she returned the boy's embrace. No one spoke for several moments, just the soft sound of applause and the proud gaze of people who had once considered Nora unremarkable. As she stepped off the stage, Nora caught sight of Supervisor Langston at the back of the crowd. Their eyes met briefly, his quickly lowering in something that might have been shame or regret. Nora felt no triumph, only a quiet hope that perhaps he too had learned something about seeing people differently. Later that evening, as the ceremony concluded, Colonel Whitaker approached Nora once more. "You know what's remarkable," he said. "Marines train for years to develop the courage to run toward danger when everyone else runs away. You showed that same courage naturally, just by following your conscience when everyone else looked away." Nora shook her head slightly. "It really was just a sandwich," the colonel smiled. "It's never just a sandwich, Nora. It's the reminder that even in our darkest moments, we're not invisible. And sometimes that's all we need to find our way home." What moment in your life did justice arrive late, but was still sweet? That night, Nora sat by her window, watching raindrops gather on the pane. She never imagined a sandwich could echo so far, but it, not through noise, but through impact. Because true kindness isn't about visibility, it's about visibility given to the unseen. And in a world where many walk by, Nora had chosen to stop, and that changed everything. 6 months later, Nora Bennett still worked at Iron Ridge Metalworks, but much had changed. Following the media attention, the company had established Lunch with Honor, a program that partnered with local schools to identify and support children in need. As the program's employee representative, Nora helped coordinate monthly food drives and mentorship opportunities. Supervisor Langston never returned to his position. After a company review, he was reassigned to a non-supervisory role in another facility. His replacement, a former military veteran herself, implemented a management approach that balanced security needs with humanitarian values. Each month, Nora made the 2-hour drive to visit Jacob at Camp Ridgecrest. Their unlikely friendship had deepened, with the boy now calling her Miss M, and proudly showing her his progress in the Young Marines program. The trauma of his mother's death and his days on the street would never fully disappear, but Jacob was healing, supported by his uncle's family and the continued connection to Nora. At the factory, the lunchbox Nora had used that November day was now displayed in a small case near the entrance. Beside a plaque reading, "Kindness needs no permission, only a heart." New employees were told the story during orientation, establishing it as part of the company's evolving culture. During a community outreach event, a young factory worker approached Nora with a question that many had wondered, but few had asked directly. "Weren't you scared of losing your job that day?" she inquired. Nora considered this for a moment before answering. "I was more afraid of what would happen if I turned away." This simple response became something of a personal motto for Nora, who remained as modest and hardworking as ever, despite the unexpected recognition her actions had brought. On the one-year anniversary of the sandwich incident, Colonel Whitaker arranged for Nora to be guest of honor at a Marine Corps Charitable Foundation dinner. There, surrounded by decorated officers and civic leaders, Nora delivered a brief but powerful speech. "A sandwich can't feed the world, but sometimes it's enough to restore faith," she continued, her quiet voice carrying through the attentive room. "Kindness doesn't need to be grand, it just needs to be timely and unhesitating." And finally, looking at the Marines in their dress blues, she concluded with words that would later be engraved on a bench outside Iron Ridge Metalworks. "Honor doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a factory worker's clothes. Just one small act of kindness can change a terrible day, a life, and sometimes even the world." Tell us about an act of kindness you received that you'll never forget. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where kindness spreads every day. Remember, hitting like isn't just for the video, but for the truly valuable people in life. We told their story. You gave it meaning. Thank you.